In today's lesson, we are going to talk about plants and animals and how they all benefit each other in their environments. You see here how animals eat other animals and those animals eat plants. And in the second drawing, you see the same exact thing except they're fish. Fish eat other fish and other fish eat plants. And this is a concept we know very well in the environment, and it's called a food chain. So we're going to discuss a little bit about food chains. So right here we have a picture of a bunny rabbit. And bunny rabbits live in environments with lots of grass and lots of plants and trees where they can find shelter. And this is a food chain because the rabbits will eat the grass. And there might be other bigger animals such as foxes that might eat the rabbits in return. In the same environment, we'll see birds. So birds can rely on trees to produce shelter for their young, for them, and also for food. They can rely on plants. And the second type of environment I'm going to talk about is an ocean. In the ocean obviously we find a bunch of coral, we find a bunch of little tiny fish we can't even see, and we also find some kind of smaller sized fish, which is what are being drawn right now on your screen. And in the same ocean, we might have some bigger fish that swim with the little fish, and these big fish may eat the smaller fish. So these fish not only help each other survive, but they're part of a food chain. And completing the food chain in this ocean, we have an even bigger fish that will eat the medium-sized fish that already ate the small fish. So while this is a food chain, we also see how the animals in this environment are helping each other survive. So we're going to talk a little bit about a food chain now. So all food chains start with the sun, and the sun shines and it produces energy for producers. And producers can be pretty much anything that grows out of the earth. So we have little plants like you're seeing right now with leaves, and grass can fall under this category. Obviously, things rely on grass. And those, like the plants and the grass, it all gets energy from the sun. And then that energy will pass through to the next level when other things eat the plants. So some plants might have more complex root systems, they might have more leaves, but they all get their energy from the sun, and they're at the very beginning of a food chain. And flowers are also a part of the food chain. Butterflies and a lot of insects and bees, they rely on flowers to produce pollen. And so these insects will take the pollen and they will move it to other flowers and help them grow and produce other flowers. And the next part of the food chain is an herbivore. And so an herbivore eats only plants. So we have the bunny rabbit that we saw from the first environment that eats grass, it eats plants, it relies on that for food. And a deer also relies on plants for food. We also have a big, tall giraffe. And giraffes actually use their long necks to reach up into tall trees. And they rely on the leaves for their food source. So their big necks help them get food to eat. And we also have a really tiny little ladybug. And ladybugs rely on plants and grass for their food as well. The next part of a food chain is a carnivore. And a carnivore is a meat eater. So a really common meat eater that we can think of is a lion. Lions eat zebra, they eat gazelle, they eat a lot of different things in the environments, but it's pretty much all meat. A snake is another carnivore we know of. Some bigger fish can be carnivores if they eat smaller fish or krill or shrimp. And one more carnivore we're going to talk about is an alligator. So we know alligators are very ferocious and they live in water, but they rely heavily on meat for their food source. And then when these animals die, we have scavengers that come along and can clean up the bodies of these animals that have died. And a major one we know of is a vulture or a buzzard. A lot of these birds rely on the dead bodies of other animals that have eaten plants. So these come along and eat those animals. And we also have wolves that might come along and eat the dead bodies as well. So these animals kind of clean up after other animals have died. And then the last part of the food chain that we are going to talk about is a decomposer. And there are many, many, many types of decomposers. But usually we can think of bacteria that will come along and they can help clean up all kinds of remains. They really can kind of rely on any of the groups we've talked about. They can rely on scavengers, they can rely on carnivores, they can rely on herbivores or producers to get their sources of food. These really kind of break down everything at the very end. They're really the last part of the process in the food chain. So a major part of how plants and animals rely on each other in their environments is through shelter. So birds will live in trees and plants to find their shelter, and fish will live in coral or swim in schools to have shelter in their environments. And plants are also very, very important in environments. They do many, many, many things. They help provide shelter for animals that live in those environments. They help provide food for animals all the time. And they also are helped by animals because animals produce carbon dioxide, and that's what the plants need in order to live. So everything really kind of helps each other.